The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is July 20th, 2025, and we are in Zazen here at Mountain Gate. It's a slow period for Mountain Gate, and so we schedule some periodic Zazen so people can keep giving themselves a shot in the arm with their practice. I should explain that I can't do the prostrations right now, and my physical therapy people tell me that it's probably going to be another 3 months before the swelling in my knee goes down far enough. When the surgery happened, the surgeon trimmed my upper bone, leg bone, the femur, because it was torqued in such a way that I would not be able to walk without my knees going in. And so he straightened it out. He trimmed the edge of it. So now my leg can walk straight. It's a wonderful change, but the muscles have been stressed as part of this process because they're no longer able to work in the way that they had been, and it's taking them time to get used to the new way. Just as it takes people time to get used to the new system of whatever they're doing. And I would say there's one potential exception to this. It's not really 100% by any means. But in my lifetime, there have been a few notable occasions, 2 really, where there was, probably 3 when I think of it. No, I think it was 2. I think they were all related. When things were chaotic, but not terribly. They were focused on a narrow situation. The first one was the McCarthy era, where people were frightened to say things, frightened to do things, because McCarthy made a policy of terrifying people who might have espoused some version of communism, and he accused other people of being communists who were not. And in fact, it's famous because the Rosenbergs, the couple, were executed because he named them as traitors. They weren't. They didn't. But he died young of a stroke, and things sort of settled back down. Then there was the Vietnam War, and a lot of chaos in America about that. But again, that was focused on the Vietnam War. Otherwise, people's lives were going more or less the same as they had been always. But now it's very different. We're in an era of almost like total chaos. where people are being arbitrarily fired in mass amounts, thousands of people, in an attempt to adjust things to the way some people feel they should be adjusted. There are people who are being sent out of the country permanently on the assumption that they are either criminals or illegally here. And the safeguards that would ordinarily safeguard those people give them the right to appeal, give them the right to have a trial, give them a right to appear before a judge who can decide whether or not they really are who they're being accused of being. And those safeguards have been eliminated. Not only eliminated, but eliminated by the highest court in the world, or in the United States, I should say. And so people are being rounded up arbitrarily, including some actual American citizens, and shipped out with any recourse to anything. There's a lot of other things going on as well. There's an uptick of rhetoric that is nasty, accusatory, bullying, inflammatory, and it seems to become the norm. There's considerably more violence right now in the United States. It has been for a couple of years now. Most recently, there was a man who rammed into a crowd that was executing from a music venue in Los Angeles. And he didn't kill anybody. He seriously injured quite a few. There were 30 people impacted. And the crowd, furious, pulled him out of his car and started beating him up. The security guard wasn't able to get in through the crowd to just subdue him. And as it turns out, it appears now that somebody had a gun and shot him in the butt. In addition to that, I suppose, in an attempt to keep him from running away. This was discovered when the EMTs arrived and started treating people who were injured, including him. And they discovered he had a a gunshot wound in his rear end. So the story has finally come out that he was kicked out of the venue earlier that evening because he was being disruptive and aggressive. And so apparently he came back just as they were ending the concerts and went up on the sidewalk and into the crowd. So he has now been charged. He's in the hospital. He had to have surgery, I suppose, for that bullet wound. And that's typical. How many times in recent history in the United States have you read about people driving cars up into the crowd at parades, at holidays, at you name it? There's no area that appears to be safe from the threat of violence these days. So American culture is in upheaval, and people are really frightened of losing their jobs because so many thousands of people have. There's been a lot of bullying of people who have stood up for people who have been have lost their jobs. And there's a lot of bullying against people, getting even against people, lawyers, for example, who were just simply doing their duty in previous years, but happened to be investigating certain people. It is a culture that I have never experienced before and never would experience never would expect to experience in the United States. Not even in kindergarten or grade school or high school. There might be one bully, but or maybe two. In bigger high schools, there might have been a gang. But in general, it was rare for people to act out in such unpleasant, violent ways. But now there's not a day goes by without reading in the newspaper about something. A bomb blowing up that was found in the basement of a condo, and people dying violently from aggression. Far more aggression than there normally is. And there's a lot of concern about how to deal with all of this. There's some people that are sort of enthusiastic about amplifying it, not really realizing that that's what they're doing. And there are other people that are trying to resist it. Most recently, there have been a number of gatherings of people who are saying, "Wait a minute, this is too much. We can't keep going like this. This is not right." And then there's begun to be such fear that there will be repercussions if you join one of those gatherings, that there's also on the internet instructions as to how to remain anonymous. Don't take your own cell phone. Carry a burner phone. Don't go directly to the venue. Stop a few blocks short of it. Take a taxi, so you're not even driving your own car. Wearing a mask or some other form of disguise. What has happened to America that this is going on? We have two choices. We can get very down about it, frightened, aghast. Well, I think we get aghast anyway. To see adult people acting in such immature ways. But then there's another thing we can do, which is far more effective. Not that going into groups and protesting these outrageous things, like rounding up people at car washes, at farms, at restaurants, and shipping them out of the country without any possibility of relief. It's important to do those things as well. But in addition to that, there's something else that will deeply make a difference. And that is to dive into our zazen deeply enough to become free. That takes a lot of work. It doesn't happen overnight. But it can happen. It will happen if we persist. And the result is phenomenal. We change life. We change energy. We unwittingly influence in positive ways the world and everything around us. An example of that, as you've heard many times, is that Mitra-roshi, who was born into a Buddhist temple in Nara, Japan. His father was a priest, and he was determined not to become a priest. In that era, and still now, Buddhist priests were not particularly respected. The Meiji Restoration resulted in the demise of many, many temples. They were either destroyed or went bankrupt. It was a bad time. And the Japanese leaders required, in order for Buddhism to actually continue to exist, that the leaders of Buddhist temples agreed to certain terms. And this has resulted in the fact that Buddhist monks could be conscripted, were conscripted into the Second World War to fight, even though Buddhism is a non-violent religion. But that was the price they had to pay in order to keep Buddhism alive in Japan. And they did this in order to do so, with the fortunate results that we in this generation can continue training in this deep, deep way that was available in very, very few places in Japan nowadays. Perhaps only one. There were others, but those teachers have died. At any rate, so all this came down to the fact that most Buddhist priests, in order to survive, simply became funeral directors. And that was not very well respected. There's a Japanese movie, the name of which I don't remember, which sort of featured this cultural thing. And there is a man in the family who dies, and so there's going to be a funeral. And so the priest comes in this enormous big car and harangues people. Maybe it wasn't haranguing, but anyway, he spoke on and on and on and on and on and on. In the meantime, the audience, the family, was sitting seiza with no cushions. They're sitting on the tatami in that particular room. And it's not fun to sit on tatami without any cushions. It's much harder than it seems to be. So they're wiggling and so on. And there's some other things going on in the movie. Anyway, the whole thing is expressing the view that the Japanese culture had, or has still perhaps, of Buddhist priests. The fact that the national television station has done a number of specials on Sogenji, because they're so fascinated by the fact that foreigners would come to Japan to train in a particular Zen temple, Buddhist temple, Rinzai temple, when the Japanese people feel that Zen practice is brutal. And in many cases, that actually is accurate. So they're fascinated by this. And they've been asking at Sogenji, why aren't there Japanese here? And Chi-san, the American woman who translates for Mitra-roshi and is a very, very senior person, in fact, she's a Roshi now, said in one of these videos, I don't know, why? At any rate, so Sogenji is kind of famous because there are foreigners training in Zen in Japan. So that may be turning things around a little bit, but it's not quite sure whether that will, because in one of those videos, in which case the requirement to do the video at Sogenji was that they send the people who were going to video it to Sogenji for a whole week for training themselves. And of course, they sent the underlings. The people who were at the top did not come, except to do the video itself. And I remember at one point they were filming the use of the keisaku, the encouragement stick, which in Rinzai Zen is quite long and you're struck from the front. you bend over, and the idea is you're struck on the muscle right up close to your neck. It's considered to be an acupuncture point, and the idea is that it will deepen your energy, drop it into your hara, and enliven you. So in this case, one of the Sogenji foreigners was demonstrating the use of it on the gaitan, the tan outside the zendo proper, where people who are only going to be temporary sit. And so he strikes the young woman who's come from NKK, and she immediately goes, "I die! It hurts, it hurts, it hurts." Very dramatic. The guy that hit her was so surprised because he didn't really hit her very hard. Anyway, it was a great show, and it only, I'm sure, reinforced the idea that Zen practice is brutal. So, how did Hiroshi get from his birth temple, where he was determined not to become a monk and wanted to become a psychologist, because he thought that was how he could deal with the things he didn't like about himself. Before that, when he was younger, he wanted to be a pilot, and he actually wanted to fly in a rocket. But what changed him? What turned him in a completely opposite direction? Well, when he was in college, going to Hanazono University in Kyoto, he would commute every day from Nara, which is quite close by and easy to commute by train. And on one day, his father asked him to take some papers to the headquarters temple, Myoshinji. So he had to take an earlier train, and then an earlier bus. And it was crowded. And as he was there, he noticed an older man dressed in priest robes, which sort of surprised him, who was so profoundly quiet. He just simply moved silently through the crowd and found an empty seat at the end of at the back of the bus, sat down and began reading a little book. He was so entranced by this man's energy, his complete let-go-ness, that he was delighted when it turned out that the man was not only getting off the bus where he was supposed to get off, but was actually going to the very temple that he was supposed to deliver the papers to. Myoshinji is a headquarters temple, one of the 14 headquarters temple of the Rinzai sect in Japan. And it consists of 44 sub-temples. These were built by priests who were authorized to teach, and so they just simply built their own temple on the same property. It's an enormous property. And very few of them, only 4 of them, are actually teaching temples anymore. The others have tried to survive in various ways. There's one that is a temple garden that charges money to get in. 2 of them are kindergartens. At least 2, I believe, are bed and breakfasts, where you can go and seemingly experience the at least being in a Buddhist temple. You can sit. There's opportunities to sit zazen. They'll teach you how, but it's not a training temple. It's not a place where you're going to do other than go, maybe do a little sitting and have a nice breakfast, wander around town, come back, stay the night, maybe do another little bit of sitting the next morning, and then leave for your destination. or stay a week. At any rate, this man went to a temple called Ryun-in, which was actually one of the 4 teaching temples. And it turned out that the priest, was Yamada Mitra-roshi. Harada's father had actually trained at Shofukuji. And so it completely changed young Harada's destination for life. He finished college, and then as soon as that was done, he walked overland, which is traditional, to Shofukuji, which is in the city of Kobe, Japan, and began training with Yamada Mitra-roshi. He went to every sesshin, of course, because he was a resident monk. He'd been ordained as a kid, so he didn't have much to do to up it. And for a number of years, he did this, 2 or 3 years. And he found himself disgusted at the end of the Rohatsu Sesshin, his 3rd year, I think it was, that he hadn't yet had Kensho. And so he went into Mitra-roshi, into his room, and said, I'm leaving. I'm going into the mountains, and I'm going to camp, and I'm going to do zazen 24/7. And Mitra-roshi just looked at him and said, come back when you've had Kensho. And so for a year, Harada went into the mountains. There's plenty of mountains in Japan. And moved around to different places, camped, and did zazen deeply, seriously. And then one day, a group of people, it was a Sunday, a group of people came up the mountain and asked him if he was a Buddhist priest. And he replied yes. And so they said, you are so lucky. You get to do zazen all the time. We work and we only get Sundays off. And it's the only day we can do zazen. And something was triggered in Harada. All of a sudden he realized all he had to do was to receive. Open-handed, no plans of how to respond or react, no preparation, just openly receiving whatever came to him. No matter what the quality of it was, the clarity that he had experienced would allow him to simply respond in the most appropriate ways. And I've shared also a very big example of this. When he was still at Shofukuji and senior enough to be one of the head monks, this was told to me by someone who was in the group of temple workers, the Shugyosha, people who are living in the temple training deeply there because they have a yearning for spiritual practice. And so they were outside the inner walls of the temple, but still on the grounds of the temple and doing some kind of manual work. And as it turns out, at the same time, there was a group of homeless people living on the temple grounds, and they were convinced that the temple was cheating them out of water. So the person who seemed to be the head of the group, this person who told me about it, said seemed to be no stranger to violence, came up and was in Harada's face, screaming at him, yelling at him. Can you imagine what you would have done under these circumstances? left, ducked, argued back. But Hutter did nothing of that. He simply looked the man gently in the eyes, not confrontationally, honored him as a human being, not as an irate homeless person. And he just got more and more inwardly quiet, just deeply listening to what the man was screaming at him about. And what happened then was that the man began to respond in kind and began to be more and more quiet. And when they were both deeply quiet, Hutter spoke. They were able to make arrangements and solve the problem, and the man walked away. It was because of Mitra-roshi's demeanor. It was because of his lack of aggression back at the man, his honoring of the human being that was in front of him, despite that person's behavior. And it completely defused the situation. When we get to a deep enough place and have let go enough, we too can respond in the same way, not necessarily getting deeply quiet, but with open hands. No need to defend anything. And this changes countless beings. It completely changes the energy around us. And as more and more of us engage in this deep spiritual practice and become more and more able to be let go and respond in these let go ways, things change. Many, many years ago, there was an attempt to quantify this. And there was a group of people living in a town in the United States. And they were all practicing meditation. So they decided to do an experiment. The entire group would do meditation regularly and deeply for a month. And they would monitor previous and during and future crime rolls. And as it turned out, the crime rate diminished significantly while they were in that month of meditation. So even if we haven't become totally enlightened, or even partly enlightened, and haven't even reached a point where we're let go enough that we can offer presence instead of aggression, or I should say fighting back. I don't think we would offer aggression necessarily. It makes a difference. And the more of us who do that, the more it will counteract the intensity of chaos that surrounds us in the United States these days. It's not just in politics. It's also the weather. There are superstorms intensely destroying homes and lives. All the more so because being superstorms, They aren't ordinary tornadoes or hurricanes. They have wide swaths of destruction. We've seen this over and over and over again. It's getting hotter, and there's all kinds of warnings on the internet how to deal with extreme heat and how unhealthy it is and dangerous it is to be out in it and what you can do. There are people who want to deal with global warming. There are other people who say, oh, no, it's normal. I won't get into that. There's no need to get into that or into the politics either. But there's plenty of indications that this is a crazy time. But it's the very best time to do practice. And it is a time when we can truly influence the environment, the people, the results. We're not trying to make something different. We're letting go our own investment in some idea of who we think we are or need to be. And just working on that, just that letting go process, makes an enormous difference. So that is what we can do. Of course, if we're motivated to do this, we should also take action, but being very careful that we're not reacting, that we're responding to the situation, that we're not joining the aggression in the same way. We're not being aggressive. We're just saying, this isn't right. It's not right. So I thank you for listening. I have to say also that I'm incredibly positive about this. I know we can make a difference. And I know also that it's going to take a lot of work on our part because it's not easy to let go. We are dependent upon our self-image for seemingly keeping safe. But as we go deeper in our practice, we discover that there's a lot of holes in that self-image, that it's not really real. And that allows us to be more free, more let go, more true to our true nature. So thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.